this week's Wednesday seminar. I'm Taylor Fraenkel, Director of the Security Studies Program here at MIT. I'm really delighted today to welcome Soyoung Lee, who's an Assistant Professor of Political Science at Yale University. She's going to be talking to us today about her book manuscript, The Making of National Interest. She received her PhD from Stanford in 2023. She studies international relations with a focus on how domestic politics influences international rivalries, territorial disputes, and perceptions of national friends and foes. Her work has been published in some extraordinary outlets, including the APSR, International Organization, and International Interactions, among others. And she's received several awards for her research from the American Political Science Association and the Peace Science Society. So it's really great to have you with us today. We look forward to learning about your project. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Thank you all for having me, and thank you all for being here. As introduced, my name is Soyoung Lee, and I'm an assistant professor at Yale University. And today, I'm very excited to share with you my current book project titled The Making of National Interest. So the main question that this book tries to answer is, what international issues become perceived as national interest worth fighting for, and why? And by national interest, I'm referring to issues that can mobilize widespread and persistent support for conflict among its citizens. And the reason why I got interested in this question in the first place is because when we look at what states often fight over and what their citizens get really excited about, there are often things that look like this. So Ethiopia and Eritrea fought a war over the town of Badme. Greece and Turkey have been engaged in frequent near-war escalations over the islands of Imya Kardak. And so you can kind of see that there are a lot of, oftentimes it's over things that do not have clear material value. And you may be thinking, well, but isn't this just all about nationalism? But then this gets really interesting when we look at what states don't fight over and what their citizens do not get as excited about. So, for example, when Ecuador and Peru went to war in 1995, they went to war over the Cenepa River Basin, which is here highlighted in pink, while not fighting over the potentially more valuable areas containing minerals and oil resources. And in fact, some territorial conflict literature, some of the recent ones, are having trouble finding a positive correlation between economic resources or economic benefits and territorial conflict. So all of this kind of bring us to the question of, well, like the puzzle of like, why are states then willing to fight over objects without clear economic benefits, especially when they can be fighting over something more valuable? So to answer this question, I propose a new theory of national interest in my book. And here I argue two things. First, I argue that domestic distributional consequences affect what is perceived as national interest worth fighting for. And second, I argue that economic benefits often trigger distributional concerns and which impede unified support for conflict and impose costs on leaders. And taken together, these two implications these two arguments lead to a surprising implication, which is that international issues with clear and specific economic benefits are going to be less likely to become perceived as national interests worth fighting for. Okay, so just to give you a brief outline of what I'm going to be talking about today. So first, I'm going to introduce the theory section where I'm going to argue that economic benefits are actually going to become a liability in generating unified support and increase the cost of conflict for leaders. I'm then going to share with you the findings from one chapter. This is chapter 3, which tests the hypothesis at the state level. And this is going to be showing you with observational data that states are indeed actually less likely to claim territories with economic resources like oil and minerals. And then finally, I'm going to just briefly round this out by giving you an illustrative case in chapter 4 about Chile. This case is there just to demonstrate how distributional concerns can hinder escalation over resource-rich land. And then finally, I'm just going to close out by introducing the broader structure of the book. All right, so starting with the theory section. So the first part of my argument is that domestic distributional consequences matter. Namely, I'm arguing that issues that provide diffuse and general benefits are actually going to be more likely to be perceived as national interests worth fighting for. And this can be due to several different reasons. The first bucket of reasons is for reasons of self-interest. So we know that people are usually more likely to be supportive of things when they expect to directly benefit from it. And issues that provide also diffuse benefits are going to be less likely to trigger relative gain concerns from potential rival groups compared to issues that provide specific benefits to one subset of the society. There can also be normative reasons for why issues that provide diffuse benefits is more popular. It's because we know from previous studies that people do care about fairness and equity in foreign policies, and that they are also worried about this principal agent problem where they are worried of elites having some kind of parochial motive or some powerful people hijacking the national interest for their private benefits. Now, this leads us though to a secondary question of like, okay, fine, diffuse might be good, but then like, what issues are perceived as diffuse versus concentrated? And here I argue that issues with economic benefits are going to be less likely to be seen as diffuse. And to be clear, I am not arguing that economic benefits have to be concentrated. But what I'm saying is that economic benefits have some inherent qualities to them that make them more easily seen as concentrated. So first of all, economic benefits tend to be more divisible and excludable in nature, which can exacerbate distributional concerns. And second, economic benefits also tend to be more tangible and specific in their nature compared to non-economic benefits like national or like something more abstract like like security or problems of national honor, which makes them more easily associated with a specific domestic group. And this in turn can fuel suspicions about parochial interest involvement. So just as a clarification, I'm saying economic benefits as a shorthand, but economic benefits obviously do and can vary in their excludability and specificity. I will talk more about this in the observational data part, but for now, I'm just going to say that economic benefits tied to capital-intensive industries, like capital-intensive resources like oil and minerals, are going to feature highly more on this excludability and specificity scale, and therefore more likely to trigger these worries of concentration. Okay, so I'm going to just like illustrate what my theory is implying so far about the national interest. So here, let's just imagine that we have two territories, territory A and B, and both of them have similar historical or strategic value to a nation. And now let's imagine that territory A has an additional benefit, which is like an economic resource like oil. Conventional theories would assume that obviously if you compare the two, territory A is going to be the more beneficial territory that is in the national interest because, it has this additional benefit. But what I'm arguing is that actually it is not that simple. National interest is also a function of domestic politics, where there are leaders who are trying to maximize their tenure and domestic support for foreign policy. But there's also these domestic other actors who can serve as potential opposition, such as rival interest groups who are concerned about relative gains, the general public who may be skeptical, hold some kind of worries about leader motives. And then there's also rival politicians in most regimes where they're constantly on the lookout for ways to minimize support for the leader. So what happens now is that, first of all, the distributional benefits of the economic resource itself can be put into question. Like, if we gain this, who is going to benefit? Who in the nation can benefit? And this may trigger some concerns about relative gains and losses. And worse, what can happen is that the presence of this economic resource and the potential for some in the domestic polity to benefit more can also trigger concerns about the sincerity of these historical and strategic benefits of territory A to the nation. So it's like, what is this really about? So because now all of territory A's values are put into question, my theory predicts that actually of the two, it will be territory B that would survive as a more long-running and enduring national interest. And I'm not going to talk about this too much in today's talk, but I do find some micro-foundational support for the theory. Chapter 5 uses 4 survey experiments, and basically what it shows is that people do like diffuse benefits more than concentrated benefits. Economic benefits are more vulnerable to suggestions of concentration, as well as suggestions for concentration, as well as the worries about parochial interest involvement. So they do undermine the credibility of non-economic benefits. And finally, in a setting where people, at least in the setting that I provided to them, when people are asked to compare lands with without any economic benefit and lands with potentially concentrated economic benefits, people preferred to escalate over the land without any economic benefits. All right, so the final part of the theory, which is like we talked about the perceptions of national interest, but then okay, so like how does this translate to state behavior? So just to round it out, we have like here another territory with just historical and strategic value, and then issues with historical, strategic, and economic value. And then over here we have these like potential domestic groups that can serve as potential opposition. So my theory it predicts that the rival interest groups are actually going to have a stronger incentive to oppose when there are economic benefits because they're concerned about relative losses. The general public, also compared to the baseline, they're also going to have stronger incentives to oppose because they are more skeptical about leader motives. And these two, because the higher latency for these potential opposition also makes the rival politicians more confident about opposing, which then creates a feedback loop where there's like much more opposition when the issue has economic benefits. And this in turn can make it more costlier for leaders to pursue the issue with economic benefits. Obviously, the degree to which the leader can actually be constrained is going to depend on how severe this opposition is and how sensitive the leader is to the opposition. And we can talk more about these scope conditions and moderators in the Q&A if people are interested. So, but the general prediction from this is that in a vast majority of cases and regimes, we would expect leaders to be less likely to fight over issues with economic benefits, especially those that have a higher potential for concentration. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the observational evidence. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask anytime. Okay, great. Yes, I'm doing a great job. Okay, all right. Okay, so
I do have questions, but I will hold for the end. Yes.
All right. Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. So so as a reminder, with the state level hypothesis, especially if you put it to the issue of territorial conflict, we're gonna predict that leaders are less likely to claim territories with economic benefits, especially those that have higher potential for concentration. These include resources like oil and minerals. And I test this on 3 different data sets. The first is an original geocoded data of territorial claims in South America. And then, and this is the one that I'm going to focus mostly on in today's talk. But I'm also going to just very briefly show you the results of the second and the third test, which is the territorial data of territorial claims worldwide. And this is good to see if like the South American results generalized. And then finally on a slightly different dependent variable, which is militarized territorial conquest attempts from 1918 to 2017. Okay, so starting with the first test, so I use geospatial data of South America. And the reason I use geospatial data is because it allows us to examine which specific territories were claimed. And I also do this in South America for various reasons, but the 2 most important reasons, first of all, is that states declared independence around the same time, which makes South America a good testing ground to see what kind of territories are claimed when states are suddenly given, all similarly at a similar time, suddenly given this chance to choose their borders. The second reason is that South America is also very convenient to control for a lot of historical or administrative variables that are known to affect the easiness of making territorial claims, like pre-existing borders, historical occupation of territory, or the lack of any clear historical control by any country. So to just a little bit like visualize and elaborate on this, most of South America was controlled by Spain for over 200 years. And then the nice thing about South America is that all of the 13 countries today, they claim to be the successor states of a preceding colonial jurisdiction. And Spain, when they ruled over South America, they also left records of their colonial administrative borders. And it's like the records are not amazing, but it's there, and which is like way more than for any other continent in the world. So with this, we are able to know what kind of areas can count as the pre-existing borders. So we the 1808 jurisdiction borders from Spanish America. And we're using this, we're also able to get a sense of what kind of areas can count as areas that can be claimed for historical reasons. So as an illustration, this is the current map of current day Colombia. This Colombia is the successor state of the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada, which at one point held control over all this territory. So essentially, the gray areas would be the areas that today Colombia could claim for historical reasons. And so if you do this for all colonial jurisdictions, you're able to get a sense of like in which areas these maximum extent maps overlap. And so what we can get is there's like areas, shaded areas where it shows like overlapping historical jurisdictions. And then there's also, we can also get an area, a sense of idea of in which areas these there was like no clear colonial control. This would be like the Chaco and the Patagonia regions. All right, so unit of analysis, how do we test this? So my unit of analysis is a grid cell year from 1830 to 2001. These are 50 kilometer by 50 kilometer grid cells, and they become panel data spanning 172 years. And each grid cell year contains information on the dependent variable, territorial claims, independent variable, these resources, and all these control variables. I also do test my my argument against a smaller subset of these grid cells. These will be the high risk areas, and these high risk areas are would be areas that states can claim for historical reasons, like historical overlap or no jurisdiction, or were within 50 kilometers of pre-existing borders. And the nice thing about being able to subset on these high-risk areas is that we can have control for the fact that these are the areas with a higher propensity of claims because they can be claimed for these administrative or historical reasons. All right, so the outcome variable is territorial claims. And then the definition of territorial claims that I'm using here is borrowed from ICAO, and this refers to a disagreement between countries on where the borders lie. And then a nice feature about this, or like an interesting aspect I want to emphasize, is that the territorial claims here do not have to necessarily involve militarized disputes. The reason why I focus on territorial claims rather than militarized disputes per se is because claims are the most initial stage of states' expressions of what they wish to have. So once claims are made, they can either escalate to militarized disputes, negotiated settlements, or no action, or actually, as like Taylor has written about in the South China Sea, the states may just drag on their disputes as well. So focusing on these that's the reason why these like focusing on militarized disputes or like the strategy may lead to some bias, which is why I'm focusing on the most initial stage of claims. And how do I code these claims? They start with like drawing out the list of territorial claims from the Issues of Correlates of War dataset, the ICAO dataset. For those of you who are less familiar, this is one of the most widely used territorial conflict datasets. And once I get the list of the eligible territorial claims, I go to various sources like historical map collections, legal entries, and geographic journals to geocode the extent of claims. So this is an example of the off-grid dispute that was disputed between Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil. And then like using these maps, I like geocode them onto an empty map of South America. So if I do this for all the territorial claims data that we have, we get 62 territorial claims. These are become like these gray polygons, as you can see here from some of the examples. And then they become a binary variable of like 1 if the grid cell is disputed that year and 0 if they're not disputed. Finally, the independent variable is a potential benefit concentration. And here, the quantity that I'm trying to capture is the extent to which benefits from gaining a territory can be perceived as being concentrated on specific groups. This is a little bit harder to and like less straightforward than territorial claims, but I try to capture this using the capital intensity of a territory's resources. And the reason why I do this is because the underlying logic here is that usually highly capital intensive resources or industries, they tend to have higher entry barriers, which make them more monopolized, and therefore they're more seen as more excludable and specific and can trigger these distributional concerns. So the way that I use capital intensity is I use a mostly ordinal level. So the ones that are coded as being very highly capital intensive are resources like oil and gas. Medium is like minerals and metals, and low is crop, animal forestry, fishing, or no resources. And here, I'm not sure if you can see the exact colors, but this like measure is time varying. So if you have like oil and gas being discovered or minerals being discovered, you would see the grid cells changing colors. Okay, so results. So before I show you any tables, I'm just gonna show you a visual overlap of like what I'm like doing, because I think I was giving you, I was like talking a lot. So here there's like 3 example maps, 1890, 1920, and 1960 of South America. What I do first is I first overlay these high-risk areas. These are areas that can be claimed for historical administrative reasons. I then overlay the data on the mineral deposits, oil deposits, and then finally the territorial claims. And actually, you can kind of like see the results with these figures as well. So like here, you can see that the territorial claims like do overlap with minerals, but there's also like a lot of other territorial claims where when other minerals and oil deposits that go unclaimed. So you can already kind of see that there's like not much of a correlation here. But because we can't really like just eyeball 3 maps and then call it a day, what I do is like I impose grid cells on them, and then I look at the correlation of these variables within a grid cell. The main model that I use for this analysis is a spatial lag model with year fixed effects to control for the effect of time. But this model is like very robust to using alternative spatial models or like just regular OLS. So here, this is like the regression run on all grid cells, and then this is the regression run on just like the high risk grid cells, which are regions of like overlap, no jurisdiction, or previous borders. And you see that there is like a negative coefficient sign for both minerals and oil and gas. And then translating to marginal effects will be about like 13 to 46% decline in territorial claims. The marginal effect, though, is like I will say like kind of like volatile depending on like what kind of like spatial matrix you're using. But the reason I still have it here is just to give you a sense that it's like not, it is still like there is some substantive decrease in the effect of minerals and oil. And finally, I think model 2 is also worth noting, because this means that even when states can claim a territory for like no economic, for like just like historical or administrative reasons, you still see lands with these resources being less likely to be claimed. Okay, so the other tests I'm gonna go like very quickly, but I just like what I'm just gonna show is like that I do this the pretty similar thing with the worldwide map of like resources and territorial claims, where red is like territorial claims, green is the geocoded oil deposits, black are minerals, and then yellow are these like areas that can be coded as high risk depending on like the country's previous maximum extent. And here too, we also find a pretty negative effect of resources on territorial claims, regardless of like whether you're just doing it on all grid cells, high risk, or OLS, or spatial lag models. Okay, so final test is the territorial conquest attempts. Here, I'm changing around my DV a little bit from just claims to actual militarized attempts to seize disputed territory. And the reason why I do this is because obviously I explained about how claims are less susceptible to the selection, and they're like the most initial stage. But it could also be that territorial conquest attempts are like more interesting in some ways, because there could be a costlier sign of like what states really want. So it will be like very reassuring to see that the results are same across these different dependent variables. There's 94 attempts in this data set. And then I code the presence of resources for all these 94 attempts. And here we still see that over 67, 2/3 of like all the territorial conquests that happened in this period, they're all very unrelated to resources. So this like the actual existence of resources, like that's coded when the resources, are actually present at the time of the dispute. And then I coded everything as being anticipatory if there were just like talks about resources, or if resources were ever discovered later, even after all the disputes had been resolved. So like these are very generous codings. Like I mean, like one of these here are like the Sinai Peninsula, which wasn't even for resources. But even with all these like generous coding, we still see that it's about like 67% are unrelated. Okay, so I think I've been talking a lot actually. Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna just spend the next 5 minutes.
Take plenty of time.
Okay.
Take your time. Yeah.
All right. Well. Okay. Well. Thank you. Just gonna spend the next 5 minutes just like briefly illustrating the theoretical mechanisms, and then I'll wrap up. Okay, so just an overview of the theory, again reviewing. My argument was that economic benefits, especially those that can be more excludable and specific, will serve as constraints against escalation. And the mechanism, there were two mechanisms of why I predicted this. The first was it's going to trigger these concerns on distribution of the economic benefit itself, like the relative gain concern. The second mechanism was that it could cast doubt on the sincerity of the non-economic benefits. This is like the parochial motive concern. So today I'm going to just talk about the first one, which is the relative gain concern using the case of Chile in 1878. And the reason why I present this case is I like this case is because oftentimes like Chile in 1878, if anyone's like familiar with this case, like this case could be seen as or like people think that this on the surface that this is a case that goes against my theory. But the interesting part about this is that when we look at this case like deeply, in fact, like this case also like there's a lot of the theoretical mechanisms that pop up in this case, which is why I like it, and I'm gonna just like talk to you about it. All right, so so just to give you a background of what this case is, this is the dispute in Antofagasta between Chile and Bolivia. I have two maps here just to put everyone in context. So this is a map that I just pulled from Britannica. It just shows the current map of Antofagasta, just to situate your people or yourself in like where it is in the world. And then the right-hand side map might be the more interesting one for today. It shows like these are the historical boundaries, and then the shaded areas are essentially the areas that were disputed during this period between Chile and Bolivia. So this is interesting again because the Chile and Bolivia have been disputing the lands of Antofagasta since the 1840s, and Antofagasta had these resources which are like that were considered very valuable at the time, which is nitrates. And the interesting, these two countries they tried to make a lot of like treaties on it, made some treaties in 1866, but like that didn't really work out. Essentially, they did arrive at a pretty solid treaty in 1874, where they agreed that Chile was going to have the lands south of the 24th parallel, which is the dotted line here, and it would give up lands above the 24th parallel, so Bolivia would be having them. But in return, Bolivia would stop imposing taxes on, or would not increase taxes on Chilean companies operating in this region for the next 25 years. So that was the agreement of 1874. But in 1878, Bolivia actually imposed taxes on the ANRC, which is the Antofagasta Nitrates and Railway Company, which was a Chilean company operating in the Bolivian region of Cobija here. So this was like a 10% tax. And then so Bolivia actually claimed that they were not violating the treaty. They said that we agreed on no state government treaties. This is a municipal tax, so it like doesn't align. But like Chile was like, or like ANRC was like, this is nonsense. We're like really upset. So ANRC officials got really mad about this. And then so what they did was like they went to the Chilean government to ask for support, and they actually thought that they were going to have good luck in persuading the Chilean government to escalate this on their behalf, and even to maybe like reclaim the region of Bolivia at this because like as a pretext because this violation of the 1874 treaty could serve as a pretext. And if you look at some of their, another reason why I like this case is because 1/3 of the Antofagasta Nitrates and Railway Company (ANRC's) stockholders was held by this British firm called Anthony Gibbs and Sons, and because they were British, they left records of everything. So we like have a really good sense of like all their like correspondences to each other. And there's like a lot of interesting things there. But anyways, so as you can see here as an example, they were talking about like, fortunately, we have like very influential Chileans among our shareholders, and then they're gonna be put under strong pressure to act and act energetically. And they actually had good reasons to believe that Chile would come to its aid because, first of all, the Chilean economy was heavily dependent on mining, especially on nitrates. Chile had been hit by a severe recession, especially in 1875, so just before this crisis. So they had like all the more incentives to like go for a resource-rich territory or to maybe escalate for diversionary purposes or whatnot. And the ANRC was also a powerful company, so they made use of their resources to actually reach out to the president. They like met directly with the president multiple times. They also had a ton of money, so they used their media connections to launch a propaganda campaign where they were framing this as like an insult to the Chilean national honor and so on. And finally, Chile was like militarily stronger than Bolivia. So there's like very good reasons why Chile might escalate. But then the problem is like Chile was actually very hesitant to escalate, and then it was even more hesitant to actually like Chilenize or conquer the territory in question. So like this is like, why is this? And the answer becomes clear when we look at kind of the rival interests, the relative gain concerns, and like the domestic opposition that came from it. So here's like 3 photos of like different people, and these are the men that are continuously mentioned in the Anthony Gibbs and Sons letters. So I just have the pictures up there for you. But ANRC's main problem was that they were not the only company operating in Chile on nitrates. The problem was that there were also a lot of other mining interests, and it's a lot of elites who had investments in Chilean and Peruvian nitrates. So it's like their names and then their affiliations with all these like other mining companies. And what they did was like they used their political power to refuse to call to the Chilean Congress into session. So they like delayed the like discussions about Bolivia and delayed the declaration of war on Bolivia. And they also made this alleged lobby of 2 million pesos to give up any de facto control Chile had over the 24th parallel and to cede all lands to Bolivia. So they were actually lobbying in the other direction of giving up land and de-escalating. And ANRC officials acknowledge this, so they talk about this a lot in their letters. Like sometimes they like don't use the nicest words, but one example I have here is they like show about this. Like I must tell you that I do not actually feel very comfortable, simply because I doubt that Chile will come in the defense of the treaty for the nitrate problem, since the greater the difficulties of working it in Peru and Bolivia, the more valuable the Chilean deposits are. And you can be sure that if one group supports us, the other interested in the Chilean nitrate deposits will not. With Peru on one side and Chile on the other, and seeing how their positions would improve if attacks were imposed upon us, I confess that I'm somewhat skeptical of our current position. So you can see like these the relative gain concerns and how that is impeding this like unified support over this territory. All right, so to summarize, the relative gain concerns from specific economic interests in their unified support. And one thing is that I would like to say here is that Chile did go to war with Bolivia in the end, which is why in the observational data it's actually coded as going against my theoretical prediction. But and I'm happy to talk more about this. But many actually point to Chile's Patagonian concessions for the reasons of going to war. Like a lot of scholars don't think that Chile went to war because of ANRC or the nitrates. So it was actually for a different reason, which I could talk more about later. And during the war, we also see like support for the second theoretical mechanism as well, the parochial mode of concern. So the opposition enjoyed a lot of advantage in political debates because the shareholders, because they were asserted that they would be held by these personal interests, they were like less vocal about the need to continue the war, while its competitors could plead the public interest, so they were more vocal. They were also just like 2 months into the war. There's colonels writing about this where they already suspect the real motive of the war. This colonel is asking, like, did we go to the war for the homeland or for nitrates? And finally, the Chilean government also worked a lot to distance itself from the ANRC in multiple times. Okay, so to conclude, so this is the general outline of my book. Today I talked about the theory section, the state level implications, and briefly about one of the cases. Happy to talk more in the Q&A if anyone is interested about the case of Bolivia, which talks about the mechanism at the public level. This is more about the parochial motive concern mechanism. Or the chapter 5, which gets more to the micro foundations or to the individual implication perceptions of national interest. And this is with the 4 survey experiments on the U.S. The final chapter is on the elite level implications. This tests like how do elites like actually really talk about these disputes, and then I test this using text analysis of U.S. politicians during the Gulf War and then Filipino politicians' rhetoric around the South China Sea. Okay, so the implications of this research, I believe, is like first, I think this contributes to our understanding of distributed politics and foreign policy. So we conventionally tend to think that pursuit for private interests is easier when benefits are concentrated because of collective action theory. But what I'm actually arguing is that but when it comes to like salient international disputes where the costs are diffuse and people know about it, then it can actually become harder to pursue these interests because once there is a private interest involved, it makes it harder to for it to be seen as national interest. The second contribution of this book is on a more specific level of like the role, how we think about the role of economic benefits, especially resources in conflict. So traditionally, we've thought about economic benefits, how they're considered more beneficial, all else equal. So many of the debates that have been on this is like the extent to which these economic benefits can be more beneficial. Like no one has, I think, really doubted that they would bring some kind of benefit. But what I'm arguing is that it's not that simple. Economic benefits can actually devalue some issues by becoming a liability in generating unified support and increasing the cost of conflict. And empirically, it joins some recent studies challenging popular beliefs about resource-rich wars. Finally, this book aims to answer the question of like, well, then like what becomes national interest? What kind of issues can bring the nation together? What kind of issues like trigger nationalist sentiments and rallying by looking at the question of like, what is it that states fight for and why? So thank you very much, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you, Soyoung. So floor is open. Let's see, Joel, you have the first question because I saw your hand first, and everyone else, please keep your hand up.
Thank you for coming to address us today. And I particularly appreciate the depth of the historical cases that brought. In thinking about the predictive power of the model, I've drawn 2 conclusions. One, that the State Department ambassador to Iraq in 1990 was right not to tell Saddam, give him a stiff warning about going into seize the oil fields of Kuwait because he wasn't going to do it anyway. And secondly, that the Trump administration was wrong to recently warn the government of Venezuela against seizing energy-rich disputed territory in Guyana because they weren't going to do it either. Have I understood you correctly?
Yes. So yes. So I would agree with this. Even with the Venezuela one, Maduro recently, or I guess it's been a year now, but there was a popular referendum about on the of like to the Venezuelans about how much they wanted to seize Essequibo, which I think is the which is like the territory in Guyana with oil, and there was like very low turnout on that, which is obviously also due to other political reasons. But I think what you're saying is right, in that these like issues with economic benefits, they often fail to garner a lot of like this long running unified support from the domestic public.
Caitlin.
Thanks for a super interesting talk. I have a question about the mechanisms in the theory, and it's probably one you've thought of, but can you talk about how, if at all, you've thought about the role of regime type in your argument? Because I guess I'm wondering, do we expect the mechanisms in your argument to actually work in all different types of regimes? It strikes me that there are regimes where public opinion doesn't matter for public decisions, even on salient issues. There isn't rival opposition, and there's a government that actually does control the distribution and the distributional consequences. So does your theory hold up in those cases, or how have you thought about kind of stress testing your theory's mechanisms on that?
Yeah.
Good, but I had a feeling you thought about this.
But then I actually really want your thoughts on this because it holds more than I thought it would. So I'm like a little bit puzzled myself. So yes, okay. Okay, so I think this is it's a lot of words on the slide, but I think this is like it gets to what you were talking about. So like one of the moderators. So there's like 4 moderators that I've thought about. First is trusting government integrity, but I think you're talking about the second one, which is like the existence of an autonomous domestic opposition. And my theory on this was that it would work best when various actors can constrain, obviously as in democracies, because you have the 2 arms one coming from interest groups, but also from the public. So like that would be when it works best. I thought it would work less in autocracies because obviously there's like not that much like rival politicians who could be autonomous, and maybe the elite level of the theory is working, but then the public level is not. So I expected it to be weaker, and I can show you the results where it is weaker, but it's not as weak as I expected. So like I would actually appreciate a lot of your thoughts on it. Other things I think maybe the third one that you also kind of mentioned was like fractionalization within the relevant industry. I test this on like if like there's a state-owned enterprise on resources, which then like people then can like expect this to be more distributed. But I'll just show you the results here. So I don't actually find like that much of a result here. So there's like some result for, I think the strongest one is for like whether or not the government is dependent on resource rents. And so what we get here is if you're more dependent, then you're more likely to go for resources, or like the negative effect of these resources are lower. But for the one that you asked, which is the autonomy of domestic opposition, I get essentially a flat line. And then also for like the presence of state-owned resources, it's like slight upward trend, but it's also like still like pretty flat. So, and they're all like within the negative realm. So this means that the resources continue to exert a negative impact. So if you have actually any thoughts on this, yes,
Like the Geddes Weeks regime type data.
Yeah.
That would kind of, that would include constrained autocracies.
Okay. Oh, it's like
It only goes 45.
So I guess Josh left. Well, so I actually did it with the Geddes with like was like a personalist regime or a personalist or monarch or like non-personalist, because I thought that would also work better. But like it's also like pretty similar when I do it there. And then I've gotten like some pushback about like using a binary. Like, so this is what I landed on. But yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Great. All right. Next question. Insong. I know you have to go soon, so I wanted to get you before you go.
Before I talk, so you talked a lot about the implication of the economic benefits in domestic politics. Just wondering whether we can talk a little bit about the implication of the economic benefits of international politics. I'm asking this because if indeed the resource is valuable, and there's the other side, the opponent, would actually also see the values of this the resource, which means that the opponent will be willing to fight over a valuable resources. And conditioning on that, that the other will be fighting over the resources, which will make the overall war as costly. So there is an alternative, the mechanisms where there's a selection that countries will not fight over this valuable resource because the opponent will be willing to fight, or perhaps there will be other domestic mechanisms within that opponent country. So you talk about. So I'm looking forward to read your book on the Bolivia and the Chile side, so that we can actually see the both sides. But could you talk a little bit about this international aspect?
Yeah. So the way I understand your question is like, is there an alternative explanation here where maybe states are not claiming these resource-rich lands because not because of the distributional consequences, but because the other country values it more, and so there's like a strategic selection.
Yeah, the war is costly.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Uh-huh.
there's the economic benefits, and that makes the war is more costly, and therefore there will be less likely. The countries do not really want to incur that high cost because not all wars are the same. They're costly
Right.
or they're not costly war. So if this is a costly case, then we can rationalize the absence of the war in this case as a result of the high economic benefits rather than a domestic distribution of consequences.
Right. So I completely agree that that like theoretically it is possible, but I can so like one is like I don't really see that mechanism happening in the qualitative cases, but I do also have some data that might persuade you that that's like not the main mechanism happening. So.
I'm already convinced by that.
Okay. Convince you further. Okay. Where is it? Like so. All right, so there's like, so I think if that was the main primary reason why we're seeing this, I think we would expect to see a couple of empirical trends that are consistent with the explanation that other states are more willing to defend it. One would be that these resource-rich territories would be more garrisoned by the other state if like the other state is more willing to defend it, because like that would be consistent with the story that these resource-rich lands are highly valued, and then like it would be more costly to fight over them. But what we actually see is that, especially after the 1940s, resource-rich territories are 10% less likely to be garrisoned than resource-less ones. So this is the black solid line is like areas without resources, and the dotted ones are the ones with, and like they're actually less likely to be garrisoned. This is not statistically significant, but I think it is like still kind of like telling that it's not really about like a. Like,
Sorry, this is for South America or worldwide?
Oh, sorry, worldwide.
Okay.
Yes. And then this is using actually the this is not my data. This is using Dan Altman's data in the international organization about like territorial conquests. And then another one, I'd like tried to rule out this explanation because I think it is like very theoretically possible, but I don't really see support for it. Another one is like that if like we think that this is like a power problem, then we would we would expect us to see the strategic selection less when there's like a higher difference of like there's a larger difference in power between countries, because if the reason why I'm not claiming this is primarily because I'm worried about cost, I would be less worried about it if I'm like really like much stronger than you are. So that was like the intuition. But then so I look at it like if there's like by power imbalance, by potential claimants, and then like is there like a difference in effects, but I don't find it. And then another one I do is like I subset to grid cells with large power shifts. So and this is also the idea that if the other country becomes like suddenly weaker, maybe I'll be more likely to claim resource-rich lands then. But I still find like pretty significant negative effects. And so I feel like even if it is possible, like I don't think it is the one that is primarily driving my results. And this is with the worldwide data. Yes.
So I'm going to interject myself as chair with a two-finger, which I think builds on Ansong's question. And can you say more about these resource-rich lands? In other words, it could be the case that, yes, there are some resources there, and so they're resource-rich, but in the grand scheme of things, they would contribute very little to a state's national power, and there's the risk of war, which would be very costly. And so, yes, I could claim this potted plant as mine and take it from you because it is a valuable green resource.
Right.
But but the risk of war is so much greater. It's really not that valuable relative to, my economy or maybe your economy. And so therefore you're kind of getting this false positive where there are resource rich land, but they're not that rich that it's sort of worth fighting over in the first place, setting aside the distributional sort of implications and consequences.
No. So I think this is like the argument that's kind of like out there about like the extent, like what is the extent to which these resources are valuable. So I think Brooks, like Stephen Brooks, have also like written. I think he also has like this recent book out on this, but like essentially like the argument there is like, well, the modern states, like a lot of resources are not valuable enough for countries to actually go conquer it, which I like completely agree with. But I think like if that were the case though, we would still see some kind of like a positive coefficient or even like a null coefficient rather than like a negative coefficient. So like I don't think it still explains the fact that we're seeing a negative effect of resources, because like that would predict us to see maybe slightly positive or just like no effect. But like I don't think it like completely explains why we see this like avoidance or of like resources.
Great. Okay, back to our regular programming. Evan.
Thanks for this terrific paper, which uses so many different types of evidence. And I find the results compelling, but I'm trying to better understand this distributional conflict, because when it comes to natural resources, and why is it that the leader can't kind of credibly commit to tax the resources, especially in a country where they might not have a history of having conflict around natural resources. So if you take Nigeria, they had civil war. Mm-hmm. You could imagine, or we expand the country a little larger, parts of the country that are used to not getting anything from oil and gas might say, forget it, we're not going to do this. But countries that are kind of naive to those new natural resources, why would it be in the political logic for them to reject the offer of the national government to say, this is going to be great, we're going to either nationalize it or tax it, or do something that everyone's going to benefit from, and use the idea of economic nationalism to rally around the flag for that conflict?
So I think there's like maybe like two things I want to say to that, which is like first, I think the promise of redistribution theoretically should work, but I think the way I understand it is that I think a lot of those redistribution promises are hard to credibly commit. So Jason Davis, he has like a recent paper on how like a lot of people prefer these like ex ante, like the reason like people prefer like tariffs, for example, are like there's like these like the like they because like the promise of redistribution is ex post, like they would prefer like the things to be regulated ex ante. So like my understanding of this is like also pretty similar, where even if there could be an ex post promise of redistribution, because it's like ex post, it is hard to completely credibly commit to redistributing. But I think your point about like, well, shouldn't that kind of vary from country to country? Like I'm like totally on board with it. So she might just show you. So this is but I think there's like some reasons why we might not expect this to hold, which is, so this is these are countries that have these like national oil companies or state-owned enterprises. So countries that don't have them, and countries that do have them, countries that don't have them, and countries that do have them. And you can see that that the countries that do have them actually are more corrupt, because they feature more highly on the corruption index. And then they are also less socioeconomically equal. So I think even if like the governments here, well, the fun thing though is like the outliers are Norway and Denmark. So like in these countries, like I do think you can probably like more credibly commit to redistributing. But in many of these countries, like even if you have the infrastructure, I think because like they are corrupt and the society there is less equal, it's like very hard to credibly commit to like these like ex post promises of redistribution.
Benish.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I wanted to ask a little bit more about your thinking about this idea of the elites building this perception of relative gain. And you mentioned that you do kind of talk about the micro foundations, but I was interested in the evidence or cases that you have from the US that you mentioned about this perception being built of national interest. And secondly, when this kind of othering is not only domestic, it's not only about the relative gains within the domestic context, but if there's another element of creating the other country, right, which is the adversary, and then the question of national interest is framed in that context versus what the domestic audiences are fighting over, you have a bigger enemy, and everything is kind of justified in that context and would lead to higher kind of territorial fights in that context. Can you talk a little bit about this ordering a little bit? Thank you.
So the ordering that you're talking about is that like what is the question basically like why can't they just frame this as like is that the question?
So
yeah.
When the elites are creating this perception or whoever is creating this perception about whether an issue is diffuse or more concentrated,
Right.
it's more in the domestic context of economic distribution, right? But what if it's more in the context of the external kind of stakes involved or the intangible salience of the issue and the the other should not win no matter what the domestic kind of benefits or consequences are.
Yeah, no, so I totally agree. So I like that's what I actually find in the surveys and the text analysis part, which is that the proponents or the leaders or proponents of the disputes, they always tried to or like most of the times, I'm not going to use always, but like most of the times they try to frame disputes as like matters of like national honor or security, and they like and they like avoid talking about economic benefits or resources. So they're less likely to actually talk about them even if when there are economic resources, because that this is like exactly what they focus on. And then, but then like it's like the opponents who talk about these economic benefits and then point out to the possibility of distributional consequences. So like what you're saying is essentially like what I like is like totally in agreement about like that's exactly how they try to frame it. It's just like it doesn't work that well when there are economic benefits.
Great. Austin.
Thanks very much. It was great talk, and I appreciated the colonial names, which were truly awesome. The intendancy of whatever. So, my question is: there's a thread of literature and observable behavior, at least since World War II, probably having to do with border fixity. That rather than contest borders, states use proxies internal to a regime to seize resources, and so you see it heavily in Africa, where Rwanda has done lots of things, in Eastern Congo, et cetera. So I wonder if how that factors into your theory that rather than contest the border, you just indirectly go for the resources, and maybe that accounts for why you see some of this selection.
Oh yeah, so thanks. I don't think that I've like really thought about this like especially in the African region, which is like I was not the region I was like focused on, so I don't think I've but I'll look into it. I think I do think that though like I don't think like that is probably the one that is like driving it, just because I feel like so like I mean like I would need to know more about the African context to say this, but like in the other context, I think like when states like when they at least like so I think sorry, I'm like just like rambling right now, but
No sweat.
so like trying to think about this. So the okay, so I think that one thing though is like even if they do that, I think it is like kind of consistent with what I'm also like a little bit trying to say, in that like this is like if they want to do it, they would do it in ways that do not really involve the public, where it's not like a official way of doing it, and like if they actually do try to do it in like some more subtle ways, like that could also be consistent with how like you're not willing to involve like all these like diffuse costs or the state resources into pursuing something that may be seen as parochial. So
it might be a way to avoid your mechanisms, or it might be something else like this norm
Yeah.
of border fixity. But I think it's probably worth poking around.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Great. Rich.
Amazing. I really enjoyed the talk. Super interesting conversation so far too. So I've been puzzling about the regime type issue. A question, and I'll presumptuously throw an idea at you. So the question is like, I think I spaced out when you defined national interest. But thinking about the regime type issue, I was like, I would intuit your definition to be something like the belief that an interest is worth going to war. But then I thought, who has to hold that belief? And you seem to slip between, like, in your case study, it's like these business elites basically need to hold this belief. And it's like their distributional conflict that messes them up from the country going to war over that issue. But then in other cases, you're talking about like the public has to believe this. And so building on like sort of selectorate ideas, I wondered how averse you would be to the idea that like the national interest is sized to the selectorate roughly. And so it's not whether there's a distributional consequence in general, but it's whether there's a distributional consequence in relation to the selectorate. And that in autocracies, you can have just as much jockeying, actually maybe even more, about like whether this firm or that firm is going to get goodies from the regime. And so then the relationship to democracy would actually be quite diffuse because like the public doesn't matter, but like actually also the public doesn't matter in democracies a lot of the time. So it's easier to do for democracies to go to war right after they've had an election than before because like the election's far away and like you don't have to like be as accountable. And just like it seemed like it would have all these like sizing the national interest as a selectorate might help you think through why you're puzzled at your own result here. Or it may just be like way off base, 45 minutes and who knows.
No, this is really helpful. Yeah, so the way I'm currently defining it is more like just like to the nation's citizens. But like I think that is I actually really like the idea of like defining it just maybe like to like confining within the selectorate because I think that is kind of like what I do have in mind, especially when I get into some of the cases where the public matters less. Like that is kind of like what I have in mind. They did actually though. They did like. I'm like a little bit hesitant though, so like to like completely define it to just like that the public doesn't matter and this is only about the selected just because I do think like even in the Chilean case I didn't get into it here but they have these like media campaigns that on the one side they're trying to the ANRC the company they run these campaigns saying that this is an insult to Chilean honor. And then the opposition, they also try to counter it by saying that no, this is like for nitrate interest. So like there is still and like Chile was going towards a democracy, but it was not it was like pretty autocratic. It's like very like held by these elites. But even then, you see like some appeals to the public. So I feel like they're not like completely ignoring the public, which is why I've been like hesitant to just like take them out of the equation. But yeah, but like I see the benefits of like what you're saying as well of like maybe like combining a little bit more. Yeah, I'll think about it. Thank you.
Yeah, the extra chili tidbits. It's like, oh, are those citizens really in the selectorate or a little bit in, or like how exactly does? I mean, publics do influence autocracies, so it's not like.
Yeah, no, exactly. No.
I'm double dipping. Taylor's telling me that you lie.
Yeah, that's the
No. I mean, like I agree.
one question per customer.
Yep.
Until we finish the first round. Sam.
Thanks so much for the talk. This is really interesting, really impressive research. You talked a lot about sort of how states are not incentivized to pursue private economic benefits for small groups, but I'm curious what the positive case for states actually pursuing diffuse economic benefits is, because it's not something that appears in the cases or necessarily in the evidence. It's sort of, and you give a few examples at the beginning of states or conflicts that do not really appear to have diffuse economic benefits. They appear to have zero economic benefits. So I'm curious what the evidence is there. And then really quickly, are you robust along mountainous? Because minerals, mountains, not territory I would probably want to take. Seems kind of difficult to do so. So I'm just curious about that. Sorry.
You don't have to answer the second question.
Yeah, you can just do this.
Yeah.
Yes. So the one that I think it wasn't the one that I.
Oh, it's in there?
I was
Okay.
like, it's like log terrain, terrain
Okay.
roughness, and average terrain. So yeah, I think that gets to that. The first one, yes. So like, what is it? That's like, then why are they like fighting over if there's like not it doesn't have any economic benefits? I think a lot of territorial conflicts, especially today, they happen over these like a lot of like historical or strategic reasons. I kind of hesitate to say strategic because like oftentimes they're framed as strategic, but and like some of them are, but then I think strategic is also like a very fungible definition of like I don't know something like are these rocks really strategic? Like I mean maybe, but like so it's like I feel like but like the historical ones I think there is a lot of push to that. So I think if you look at many of the territorial conflicts that are happening in South America or like in Africa too as well, and a lot of Asia, they are over like these like borders that were not clearly defined in the colonial period, or like areas that countries believe were in their older maps and like they have a historical title to it. So it would be so if the disputes happen, it will be over like a lot of those things.
Maria.
A clarifying question and a question. Just clarifying.
One question, you decide.
Clarifying question so I can actually understand. But isn't land itself a concentrated benefit that can be captured by interests and sort of have distributional effects all on its own? So regardless of what's on that land, just the land itself?
So like okay, so is like land the concentrated benefit itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, okay, but but then I think yes. So the original way that I really wanted to do this was like comparing across issues where something like a historical apology or whatever is like super diffuse and abstract. Like that would be like on like that ultimate end of the scale. But then the problem is like comparing across issues has like a ton of problems. So I'm focusing on territory. And within the territory, there is like variation of like who benefits from the territory. So that's why I'm like focusing on economic resources. But I think a lot of the territorial conflict scholars would still think that because a lot of these territorial conflicts are tied to these historical or strategic values, most times like territory is considered to maybe like not 100% diffuse, but but one of the ones that are considered still like pretty diffuse and related to the entire nation.
Lots of fingers. Is that a one finger or two finger? It's a one. Okay, I'll add to the list. No. We're not that kind of place. Come on. Tyler.
Yeah, thank you so much for this talk. I really enjoyed it. So I wanted to circle back to like this domestic relative gains mechanism because when I first heard of it, I kind of had like thought you were like going in a different direction. Instead of like towards this concentrated like corporate benefits, more towards like the concentration of communal benefits. Like thinking that, for example, like the community around where the territory is seized might be gaining more in terms of like economic benefits or the province of the community that the territory then falls into. So I'd imagine that like the relative gains concerns in that context, like societal perspective, would be worse if there's like a more ethnically heterogeneous society. And I think especially considering like the case that you presented where they did end up going to war, and then there's like this variation of how concentrated corporate power is across different regime types. Like, have you thought more about the societal relative gains process versus like the corporate relative gains?
Yeah, no, so I definitely think it would like this I do focus on these like more of the economic and like corporate benefits, mostly just to like keep this like project a little bit tractable. But I do think that it would obviously like there's no reason why it wouldn't apply. And we do see like actually we do see this like also happening with ethnic groups as well. So actually like so a lot of the African territorial disputes, they happen on a lot of them are like on ethnic happen for ethnic reasons. And then you look at like Seidman's research. He has like a really nice piece on how Ethiopia and Somalia are fighting over this land, but then like the parts that they fight over like vary depending on which ethnic group is in power. So like that would also be in line with what you're saying about like does this land benefit some ethnic group over others. So yeah. Oh, and then I'm blanking on the name because I'm like a little bit like my brain fried at this point. But there's also another study on Japan which looks at like, do people like living close by to the contested land, like do they want the land more or not because of like because of those like communal benefits? But the result is actually the opposite, where like they think it's gonna just like disrupt their living, so they actually are less likely to support it. But yeah.
Charlie.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering if you could elaborate more on the logic of the negative impact of concentration. But it's just so counterintuitive, and we know of so many cases domestically where concentrated interests prevail, and you would think that they would generate opposition for a variety of reasons. So, I mean, would seem like at least in some cases, like concentration would make it more likely that you would pursue an economic interest, in others that it wouldn't. But you sort of stated as a general. So how much I would think it would be rare that the opposition to the concentrated interest would make it undesirable. Not to say you've got the results, but it just doesn't seem right.
Yeah. So I think like, so are you thinking more about this as like in the conflict issue area, or or just like general international relations?
I was just thinking even in terms of claims, like if it's economically valuable and I've got a strong interest in it and I'm oil, and I might be oil broadly, not just oil like a single company. Like in that case, it was in your specific case, there were divisions within the industry, but like many times a resource would be valuable to all players in the industry. And mostly nobody else cares, and so they would have a lot of influence. And so, particularly for a plain to be distinguished from war, it would just seem like concentrated interest would prevail. And they might sometimes generate opposition, and they might not, and they would usually win. I'm not saying I accept that that's wrong, right? Because you got the data, but it doesn't seem right.
Okay. But like I think there's like the point that I would disagree though is like I don't think with especially when it's like international conflict and then the use of force, and it's something that's like very public and salient. I think like people like that logic is more like people don't, like you, as you said yourself, like people don't care, right? But like I think like people when it's like a very salient dispute, I think people do care, and that's what like makes all these constraints. So if there is like a way to escalate, or like especially in a lot of like the tariff and like the IP part, if there is so like a lot of like trade agreements or FDI agreements, like people like are not aware of them, so like people are just like not really gonna care, like I mean like sugar tariffs, whatever. So it's like you said that they give like a good example, but then I think when it comes to like the use of force, like people like presidents, I mean I think this also gets back to Caitlin's earlier question about the regime type, but I do think like leaders like do like they need to like justify themselves, and like these would therefore like they constitute a pretty strong constraint on their on like how much they're willing to justify and how much they can justify these disputes.
I guess maybe some claims are not likely to escalate, so they would be more likely to be made or whatever. So
All right, we'll park it now. I want to try to get through everyone on the list. Jim Walsh.
Well, I really enjoyed the talk, and it's great to use that geospatial data and SSP. Is Dan Altman's data set. We'd like to see that. But I want to say that, I'm having some of the same feelings Charlie's having, and that I believe your data, but something is unsettling. At first I thought maybe, why don't it's not like it's national identity. Why can't economic resources are fungible. Why don't they just cut a deal? Or why don't they lie? And then you show the data that, that doesn't really matter, or they can do everything. And so the reason why I feel unsettled about it is when I think about states and leaders winning war, I tend to think of the state as having a lot of tools, a lot of power, and more freedom of maneuver than almost any other domain in government. Like when going to war is a big deal, they have giant information advantages, just a lot. And then you start the war and you're in it already, right? What are you going to do after that? You can't go back. So a lot of advantages to the state. And so I guess my question is, I'm trying to make this feel more right to me. Maybe it's not regime type, but what about the strength of the state? Do we have a lot of strong states in Latin America? When you're looking at that, it seems to be the weaker the states, the more it would be penetrated by economic interests or other things that would make this a problem.
Yeah, so the cheaper answer to that is like that. Well, like there's the one that we do worldwide. So like that's kind of like the cheap answer.
Yeah, but there are a lot of these things
right.
that-
But the other answer to that would be, I actually think so. Like I'm not really sure if like weaker states actually like this only holds in like weaker states and wouldn't in stronger states. In fact, I think like it's kind of like going against what like the Jack Snyder's like myth of empire. Like he's actually like says like, oh, you would actually see it more and like so you would see these like so you see log rolling more in these weaker states precisely because the government is weak, so that the economic interest can like actually influence them to like take over whatever like the resource rich lands or whatever. So I don't think there's like a theoretical reason to assume that we would only see like these like deterrence powers more in weaker states. Like I think it could cut across, but I mean like I think but I like the idea of like maybe looking at like state power more specifically rather than regime type. I'm not really sure what like kind of variable I could use to like test that, but I think that's like a great one. Thank you.
So we've reached that time in the Q&A when I'm going to group questions together. So I'm going to ask two folks to ask their single question of you, then I'll turn it back to you, then I'll do that one more time. So first group will be John Caverly and Josh Gwynn. So John and Josh, please ask your question. Save your lunch. Okay, John, ask your question.
It's sort of building on Jim's question. I was looking, you gave us a lot to work with, so I didn't really get a good sense of the model. Sorry, the model for South America. But it seems like you have 3 years as your unit of observation. The dependent variable is not really the presence, right? It's really the discovery of the resource, right? Because then it goes from 0 to 1, and it basically stays 1 for the rest of the time in that. Very rarely does it go. Same with territorial disputes. And so I'm wondering a couple things based on that kind of time dependence is what Jim said, like, it's not just that these industries are capital intensive to exploit. It's capital intensive to find them, right? It's capital intensive to find them. So you either need a strong state or you need a rich multinational company that's probably working across borders, right? So I'm wondering if this is a confound to something else that makes territorial disputes less likely. And then a related question. Is there a difference in, so this will help you answer this question, isn't it?
You can pay me to be
Is there a time trend in the disputes and finding oil and gas? Like, do they cluster in certain parts along your time? Are they constant? Like, do most of the disputes precede, like an era of dispute discovery precedes an era of oil and gas discovery?
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so I can show you the results, but I know we don't, I mean, like, if you want, but like so to break it out by decade, they are very consistent over time. Like, we don't really see a time trend. Yeah, so, and then I think the first question, well, I guess they're related, but you were worried about like the time dependence of like claims just, so the resources, like they usually stay at 1 once they are discovered. These like some of the nitrates and guano, some of them like those things like drop off in 1940s when they lose values, but most of them do stay. The territorial claims, I also use like the presence of claims, but then like it's like the results though are very robust to like just looking at like so like right now it's like presence because I'm just using year fixed effects, but like it's like consistent to like just looking at discoveries, which would be like two-way fixed effects or like more like the like staggered DID models. Like it's very consistent across that, or to making the dependent variable the onset of territorial claims instead of presence. If that answers the question. Yeah.
Great. So last pair will be Brian and Eric. So Brian.
Thank you for the talk. Just to try to simplify my question for the time and everything, I'm trying to extrapolate the theory out and apply it. And perhaps this question will be out of bounds, but thinking about the Arctic and resources and future exploration and what that will mean and potential nationalism in and around that. How can you help me square your theory with the idea of arguably no historic geographic claims in the Arctic and what that might be.
Great, Eric.
Thank you. Very interesting, very provocative. I have no idea what I think of it yet, but question. So a lot of people have sort of suggested other variables. I'll maybe take a slightly different cut at this. I'm not entirely clear what's in the rest of your book. You did select, on this chapter, it's selected by region, obviously. Each or many different regions have clusters of very different sets of variables, right? So Latin America gave us a pretty good definition of that region. If we looked at Africa, you have states and you have cross-cutting tribal boundaries. If you look at the Middle East, very high concentrations of natural resources relative to the rest of the economy. So you have these very different regions. So apparently you have a large N portion of this study, but have you sort of taken a regional cut at this to look at how patterns might vary depending on the region?
Yes, I'll take this question first. So I look at it by region. The effects are they're like pretty consistent across them. They're less strong in South Asia and then the Middle East, which is like what we would expect. Like even the Middle East, like there's like it's not extremely positive, but the Middle East is the one where there's like the trend breaks up the most. So. And I think that also explains why we're seeing some effects for resource. If like the state is resource dependent, then the weaker effect of resources is weaker. So like that would be like one case where so like those two regions would be the ones that's less fitting with the theory. Europe I have to like take out because there's not that many territorial disputes there. It's post 1945, but in most other regions like Asia, South America. And Africa as well, like they hold pretty consistently. Oh, and then the question about the Arctic, yeah, I don't. So I think so. Is this like more of a question of like what are the like the policy implications of like this theory to the? So I don't know if this is like a good policy implication, but I think if like the governments wanted to justify some kind of dispute over the Arctic. One of the takeaways from this is like you want to justify it. You want to try to justify it in terms of like more security or other abstract benefits rather than focus on the resources that Arctic has. Because if you do that, then it has like a stronger likelihood of breaking apart. So, but I'm not sure if this is like the policy advice I really want to give because it's like, but like, and then there's like ways for the opposition to kind of desecuritize like these narratives because like once you have like resources, it's like easier to do it. So like that would be kind of like the policy implication. Answers your question.
Great. Well, we're right on time. Thank you, Soyoung, for a terrific talk and a terrific project.